Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today's video is a story by Luke Hemingway, and the link to their Reddit account will be below, so please go check it out. And this story is a little bit different. It isn't my typical horror story, though I would say it is still very horrific. This one is a little more of a true life style story, though it is fiction. And it is kind of more of a episode of like Law and Order SVU, that type of thing. So if that kind of content, isn't your cup of tea, this is your kind of content warning, trigger warning. Especially if you are sensitive to things involving like children. This video may not be for you, and I would urge you to try out one of the other horror stories that I have available on my channel. But otherwise, it's time to get cozy, get comfortable, because it's about to get creepy. The White Van Man by Luke Hemingway. Before we begin, I need to declare that I'm not using any real names in this story, as I don't want to give my new identity away and break my WITSEC agreement. Anonymity is definitely preferred in my particular situation. I will also not be referencing the year or particular area this took place. I am writing this out as I think it would be therapeutic for me to process this traumatic event by putting it down on paper in words. Initially, I never intended to post this on the internet, but I'm hoping it helps in any small way to shine a light on some of the disappearances in my area. I am bound by the law to keep my mouth shut on this subject, as the investigation is ongoing and highly classified due to its sensitivity, whatever that means. Oh, and don't be a wise ass and try to find anything in the media on this. It's all been suppressed to protect vulnerable parties. Again, I don't know what our handler meant by that. But anyway, I'm speaking out because I've had enough. I'm done living my cozy new life while other people are still at risk, still in danger. The people who live in the country where I grew up need to be aware and vigilant of this ongoing problem. But at this moment, its specifics are kept tightly under wraps by the FBI. Remember to keep your kids and loved ones close and in clear sight. Anyway, rant over. Here is my story. I'm going to call myself Olivia Matthews. At the time of these events, I was 12 years old and 2 weeks from my 13th birthday. I'd always felt mature for my age, but even so, everyone said looks-wise that I didn't look a day over 9. It was Thursday, the 27th of June, and I had just finished school for the day. There wasn't anything different about the day itself. There were no feelings of being watched, no overwhelming sense of dread or impending sense of doom. No warning signs whatsoever. I thought I was just a normal kid with a normal life. On a side note, I think everyone is guilty of hearing horrible things on the news that have happened to regular people all over the world, such as abductions and murders, with at no point ever truly thinking it will happen to you. Perhaps we become slightly more vigilant when walking home and make sure to check our door locks for a few nights afterwards until the novelty wears off and the complacency once again sets in. Back to the story. On this particular day, I'd just got within 150 yards of my house and was just turning the corner to enter my street, when a man fell in step with me from behind. He literally seemed to come from nowhere, and I certainly didn't hear his footsteps while he was approaching me. "Well, hello there," he said with a smile. It wasn't a sinister smile, but not a friendly one either. It was the type of smile you would do if you were showing someone what a smile was. There lacked emotion behind it. It seemed completely put on. It was a mask to hide the real face of what lurked beneath. "Hi," I murmured back after a brief scan of my mind to figure out whether or not I actually knew this man. I looked him up and down as if doing a full body scan to help me try and put a name to the grinning face glaring into my soul, and I noticed that he was dressed in all dark clothing. Dark jeans, dark long sleeve shirt, black thick shoes. He looked around mid to late 30s and medium length greasy slicked back hair. His superficial smile branded a single row of off-color white teeth and a gold premolar tooth on the left side, which seemed to sparkle in the mid-afternoon sun, almost matching his charmy act. He continued to maintain eye contact. He didn't have what you would call an intimidating physique, but he was just under 6 foot and had a rugged look to his face and hands. I couldn't take him in a fight, let's put it that way. At first, his presence wasn't a threatening one, at least not to me at the time anyway, but I figured then, and I definitely know now, that this wasn't normal. I had racked my mind over and over and was now confident I didn't know this man. I had started to realize he had waited until I walked far enough to no longer be surrounded by other people from the bus, and I had just turned the corner onto my cul-de-sac and was within 70 yards of my house. My empty house, with no one home to rescue me. I tried not to panic initially. I told myself that he'd only said hi, and we were in broad daylight. But then, things took a turn toward the sinister, and he started asking questions that got more and more alarming. At first, it was just, "It's a lovely day today, isn't it? And how is school treating you?" Stuff like that. I just answered yes and fine, avoiding eye contact, hoping that he would get the hint, as I had no interest in talking to this stranger. But then his approach changed. "I like your pigtails. They make you look real cute." He said this in a deep voice, and his breathing had increased. And then he added, "So, do you live in one of these houses?" This honestly made my toes curl in my little white dolly shoes. This is when things started to turn south. I should mention, on my cul-de-sac, there are only 5 houses, so I couldn't lie to him, as why else would I be walking on there? His question seemed completely rhetorical. He had obviously followed me and watched where I walked before he approached me. "Is your mummy or daddy home?" "Yes," I lied, but in my panic, I hadn't realized I already had pulled my keys out my pocket in case I needed to get in my door quick, and I could tell his predatory instincts had sensed this already. I could almost feel a hunger inside him grow as he realized he had caught me out, and also he had noticed me staring at my own front door out of anxiety. Damn, I had messed up. Coupled with the fact he'd already guessed that I had the keys to open the door, he knew there wasn't anyone to let me in. He knew I would be alone in that house. His voice seemed to tremble now with a poorly restrained excitement that made my blood run cold. His questions became more alarming by the second. "My car is broken down and I need to call a cab." He seemed to emphasize the word need. "May I come to your house and use your telephone?" I started to sweat. I knew this was a lie. Why would the only person you asked to help you be a defenseless 12-year-old girl? I felt my body start to pump adrenaline. I was in real danger. My body knew it before I did. Thinking back, there were so many red flags about this man. I should have realized sooner. I don't think the man blinked once during the whole exchange, and every time he finished a sentence, his face reset to that same put-on smile. His eyes had nothing to them. He would look at me and would have that look in his eye like a wolf looks at a wounded deer right before it drags its screaming carcass into the woods and tears it to pieces. I remember feeling like prey that day every time the man looked at me. I was desperate. I needed to think of something. So I pathetically attempted the stranger danger line and told him my mom didn't like me talking to strangers. He scoffed and answered with fluency that his name was Dave, and then he asked my name. I said Gina. I lied again. The way he grinned and said, "Well then, Gina, now we are introduced. We are no longer strangers." 2 things haunted me about how he reacted. The fluency of this comeback almost suggested he'd been confronted with this line before, and the way he said Gina, as if he knew I was lying and was humoring me. Or maybe he just didn't care, as soon I would just become a statistic. I tried to think on my feet again, to try to get him to leave me alone, or at least think I wasn't as easy pickings as he clearly thought. I needed to think of something that would make him believe that someone was home. Maybe my brother is up. He works nights, but he gets up around now, so you can borrow his mobile, or maybe he'll get your car going, I attempted. I genuinely thought that this was brilliant. It explained why the door may be locked, but still gave the impression someone was home. But this didn't rattle him. His facial expression changed almost immediately, not in a good way. He pulled a pair of black leather gloves from his back pocket and began sliding them on with a sadistic excitement that told me he was calling my bluff. Brilliant. Well, then let's go see your brother. He was practically orgasmic. I looked up helplessly, lost for a response, at the man who now knew he had me. He could smell it a mile away that I was lying. He had me. An experienced predator who knew how to corner his prey. A tear started to escape from my eye as I froze in terror at the realization I was done. He put his now gloved hand on the top of my back and ushered me toward my house. My entire frame was trembling. My blood was pumping round my body at a rate I didn't know possible, and I was trying my hardest to hold back a flood of tears. At this point, I know what you're thinking. What kind of parents leave their 12-year-old child alone for hours on end? But we live in a seriously good neighborhood. The sort of place where kids half my age play in the streets for hours while their parents share a glass of gin in the backyard, gossiping and bitching about the rest of the neighborhood, and where all the men go to the same local bar and go bowling together. But I think this entire event, and the events that led on from it, changed our little suburban utopia forever. So there I was, in the hands of a pure predator, a man who'd actually manipulated me and got me to invite him into my own home. And now he was going to do whatever he wanted to me between now and when my mom arrived home in 4 hours. I desperately scanned my street for assistance. My neighbors on my left were out of town, and the ones on the right, well, their cars were missing. Not a good sign. The other houses were too far behind now for me to try to run to, and the man had me walking straight forward. The man sensed this, and he gave me a psst. He met my gaze and made me follow his to the obscenely sized knife he had concealed in his sleeve. I knew if I screamed, I was dead. I knew if I stayed quiet, I was dead. So I closed my eyes, held my breath, and tried to go to a happy place, but it was useless. All I could picture was the horrific things this man would do to me and what would happen when my family came home to find my mutilated corpse. Or worst of all, not find me at all. I would belong to the man forever. All of a sudden, we stopped. I assumed we were at my front door. I started to sob, reluctant to pass over the keys. But after a few seconds, I didn't feel the man take them, so I opened my eyes to see what was happening, praying to see a cop or a neighbor confronting the man. We weren't at my door. We had reached the foot of my driveway and stopped dead in our tracks. There was no one there. We were still alone. No one had come to save me from the man. That broke my spirit a little bit more. To think you have hope and then have it snatched away is a soul-destroying moment. I closed my eyes as I awaited the man's instruction. But then I felt his hand slip, and he let out a, "No, no, no, no." His voice had slipped from this superficial charm and fluency to murmuring, and his voice took on a panicked tone. I opened my eyes again. I looked at Dave's face. The violent, malicious smile and the excited immediacy to his posture had now totally vanished. He looked as scared as I did 10 seconds ago. His hand that had been ushering me inside was now on his head, with a tight grip on his greasy hair, whilst he now stared, in what seemed like disbelief, into the section of pavement at the bottom of my driveway. He started to exhale faster and faster. He also started to dart his vision at random places all around the surrounding area. For the first time, the man started to actually look like he was scared of being caught. He backed away from me and started to make a hasty retreat off my street. He started walking backwards at first, while snapping his head side to side, as if looking for something. His pace started to pick up, and he booked it around the corner. By this time, I'd snapped out of my daze from the last 2 minutes and dashed over to my front. I rammed my keys at the lock, and after around 10 attempts and a mini panic attack, my key finally slid in the hole, and a few seconds later, I was throwing the door shut behind me and locking it up tight. It was only after the second deadbolt was in place and the chain was on that I actually started to feel safe. I quickly ran to the living room window to make sure my parents hadn't left it on night lock, meaning that Dave could come back later on and pry it open with his big knife. I ran upstairs to call the police. That was when I saw the man run around the corner to the left of my cul-de-sac. I should mention, at this point, the corner houses have pretty huge hedges that restrict the view of the adjoining main road. But from the vantage point in my bedroom, I could just make out the top of a white transit van, around 50 yards from the entrance to my cul-de-sac. As the man turned the corner, he left my vision, and I presumed he would make a swift exit down the street. But something caught my eye. I could see the top 30 centimeters of the van, and its side doors slid open around the time the man would have been making his way past the stationary vehicle. And then the door slammed shut, and a few seconds later, the van drove away. I desperately tried to get the license number of the van, but I couldn't get a clear view from my line of vision. I remember thinking about the lie the man told about his car being broken down, and wishing I'd noticed the van before. I punished myself on missing it. Maybe if I called him out on it, then perhaps he would have gotten cold feet and just left me alone. This had really shook me. I was scared, and I just wanted the police to come arrest this man so I could sleep at night. After the adrenaline wore off, and I was now sure Dave had left and wasn't coming back, I decided it was pointless to call the police. I mean, I only had what I assume was a fake name and a vague description of a mass-produced vehicle with no license plate. They would likely just tell me to call back if he showed up again, and to make sure all my doors and windows were locked, which they were. And the main issue is they would tell my mom, maybe even get her in some sort of trouble for me being alone. Who knows? It didn't seem worth the risk, as I was safe now. I would likely never be allowed to walk home from school alone or have the house to myself ever again. And I liked doing those things. They made me feel grown up. I decided Dave wasn't coming back, mainly because of the way he reacted when he saw whatever he saw at the bottom of my driveway. Whatever it was had really spooked him, and he booked it out of there pretty goddamn fast. My train of thought connected with my eyes, and they pointed myself at my driveway. That's when I saw it. At the foot of my drive, on the pavement, a yellow drawing in what looked like chalk or paint. I went down to investigate. I made my way to what I can only describe as some sort of symbol on the ground. At first, I really didn't know what I was looking at. It was some sort of crude drawing of a moth or a butterfly with simple shapes inside of a quickly drawn circle. No detail, just the very brief outline of the aforementioned insect inside a circle that had been done similar to how you draw the @ sign. I didn't know what to make of it. I was looking back in my mind, trying to think if I'd noticed something there prior to these events. But you know how it is. Kids on my street play with chalk all the time, drawing pictures, writing their names, and mapping out a hopscotch course. You know, stuff like that. So I would never have given this a second thought anyway. But whatever this meant, it had saved my life. It put the fear of God into a frenzied pedophile who was moments away from having a 12-year-old girl at his mercy. A few questions ran through my mind until my mom came home. What was the symbol? What did it mean? And why did it cause Dave to have a mini heart attack and flee to his van? How did I not notice the van before? Did Dave have a friend nearby that was his getaway? Or worse, coming to join in? Why had he suddenly decided to follow me? Had he just seen me alone and turning onto my street? Or, again, worse, had he been watching me and learning my schedule and who would be in my house at certain times? I was creeping myself out now, so I stopped tormenting myself and put some hilarious RKO out of nowhere videos on YouTube to lighten my mood and tried my best to just forget about the whole thing. Still, when my mom eventually came home, I gave her the biggest hug and told her that I loved her. She immediately thought I'd done something wrong. Typical. We laughed about it, and soon Dave in the white van, butterfly symbol mystery was slipping from my mind. Days went past since my close encounter, and before I knew it, it was Friday the 5th of July, and I had finished the final day of my school term for the summer. It had been just over a week since my run-in with the man who called himself Dave, and while I started to slowly get over what happened, over the first few days since the incident, I could have sworn I kept seeing that white van roaming around my area. But it wasn't in an obvious way. I would kind of keep catching glimpses of a white transit van, either parked around corners nearby or passing by in the side streets near my house and school. Either way, it always seemed to just come out of nowhere, like it did on that day. I would always close my eyes tight and rub my eyelids as if to try to wake myself up. It worked, though. Every time I closed my eyes, the van would be gone. In the end, I just chalked it up to lack of sleep over the event and tried to convince myself I wasn't being rational. Even so, I found myself subconsciously not wearing headphones when walking, being more vigilant when walking past objects that people could hide behind, parked up vehicles, and concealed walkways, just in case Dave was hiding somewhere waiting to jump out, grab me, and finish what he started last week. And, for a few days after, I made sure I always locked the front door and windows after I got home to my empty house. I wasn't sleeping great either, constantly looking out my window at night, making sure there was not a white van at the end of my street. So that was part 1 of the story, and there's 2 more parts that I'll be reading over the next couple of weeks, so please stay tuned. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. I really appreciate it. Bye!